Exchanging a gift from Tiffany's leads Rachel to her fateful partner. It's an interesting love story between two people who are already in relationships. When they meet, they realize they aren't with the people they should be with. The story begins on a beautiful cold winter's night in New York. The Christmas spirit fills the city as sparkling lights and decorations highlight the small shops and large buildings. Among these shops, we see the beautifully lit Tiffany's and many shoppers. A woman working there brings Ethan several engagement rings. Ethan picks a ring because he wants to propose to his girlfriend, Vanessa. He is there with his daughter, and together they choose the ring. The woman brings rings with a complex and princess cut, but his daughter, Daisy, asks for a presidential cut. The woman brings a stunning sparkling ring, and they decide on it. They head to the checkout when another customer enters, looking for a gift for his girlfriend, something more affordable. Daisy and Ethan leave the store, and as Ethan adjusts her scarf, the man who is looking for the gift for his girlfriend carelessly bumps into Daisy. Soon after, a loud crash is heard, and we see the rude man on the ground. He was hit by a car. Ethan rushes to help, and luckily, the ambulance is there. Two blue Tiffany bags lie on the ground as Ethan checks if the man is okay. When he sees that everything is fine, he picks up his bag and heads over to his daughter. Meanwhile, Rachel is preparing dinner. Adding various spices and perfecting her dish, her best friend Terry walks in and jokes if she's talking to the food again. Rachel laughs and says she's talking to the soup. Terry gives her lemons and Rachel thanks her for the shopping. After looking around, her best friend notices a framed picture of their restaurant's menu and congratulates her on their success. Rachel says she needs to change because she's celebrating her anniversary with her boyfriend and asks Terry to watch the soup. Observing the kitchen, she jokes about how Rachel always makes a mess. Rachel comes out in a beautiful floral dress and tells her she has to go because her boyfriend Gary will be arriving soon. It's noticeable that Terry doesn't like Gary, as she asks Rachel if she helped him get into the New York newspapers. Rachel says she talked to the editor-in-chief, and after sending him some food, he agreed to put him in the paper. Terry thinks Rachel is too kind and forgiving toward Gary, and that he's just a careless guy. Rachel's phone rings, and it's Gary. She answers the call, but is surprised to hear someone else on the line. Concern is visible on her face as she listens to the bad news. On the other side of New York, Daisy and Ethan are sitting together in the living room. It seems that Ethan can't find his phone and asks Daisy not to tell Vanessa while she calls Vanessa from the iPad. Vanessa answers, and Daisy tells her that she loves New York, the Christmas spirit, and the snow, even telling her about the man who was hit by a car. Vanessa says she remembers all those things because she's from New York, but she doesn't like them. She'll be arriving tomorrow, which means Daisy and Ethan can enjoy some fun activities on their own. After ending the call, Daisy falls silent, so Ethan asks if everything's okay. Daisy is worried about the man who was hit and wants to make sure he's okay. She asks her dad if they can visit him in the hospital tomorrow morning, and although he hesitates, he agrees. The man who was hit is Gary, Rachel's fiancé, as we see her visiting him in the hospital. She asks the nurses if his concussion is serious, and they tell her that it isn't and that he'll be fine. Gary asks if he can leave, but the nurse tells him he must stay until the evening for an MRI scan. He doesn't remember what happened the night he was hit, so they need to scan his brain due to his memory loss. Gary tells Rachel to go home and go to the restaurant because he'll be fine. Rachel gathers his things and leaves, but as she's in the hallway, she hears Daisy and Ethan asking about the man who was hit the previous night. She approaches them and tells them that Gary has a concussion, but that he'll be okay. The nurse at the reception tells them they can't talk in the middle of the hallway, so the three of them sit in the hospital cafeteria. Daisy is an interesting child because she asks Rachel different questions about her and Gary, including whether Rachel is a stripper because she was still in the same dress from the previous night. Ethan stops his daughter and asks Rachel if she lives in New York. Rachel answers that she lives in Queens, and Daisy tells her that they used to live in New York, but are planning to return. Ethan is a creative writer at UCLA, and his daughter tells Rachel that he also has a book. Daisy has already figured out enough when she mentioned engagements, and Ethan says it's time for them to go home. Before Rachel leaves, she invites them to her bakery, Galini's, and her Little Italy restaurant. Ethan laughs and thanks her for the offer, joking that he's the world's biggest bread consumer. The blue Tiffany bag catches Rachel's attention when she tosses Gary's bag of things onto the bed after getting home. Intrigued, she takes the box out of the bag but can't bring herself to open it. She spends the day staring at the box, unsure whether to open it or not. When she finally decides to open it, a phone call interrupts, so what's in the box remains a mystery. Ethan has a meeting with a friend. He will try to get him back into the Simon & Schuster family, so Ethan can continue writing and they will publish his work. Rachel talks to Terry on the phone, and Terry tells her that she must open the box. Rachel doesn't want to because she'll feel bad about it, plus, she doesn't like little bows. Terry says her girlfriend can open the box, but Rachel is afraid it might be an engagement ring because she's not sure if she's ready for marriage. She decides not to open the box, hoping that Gary bought something else from Tiffany's. Trying to ease the situation with excuses like maybe he bought her a yo-yo or a pencil from Tiffany's, Rachel goes to work and tries not to think about it. Later in the evening, Ethan is alone when he receives a message from Vanessa saying her flight has been delayed, followed by a message from his daughter inviting him to stay for dinner at her friend's house. Not knowing what to do, Ethan goes for a walk through the Christmas market when he spots Rachel's bakery. He decides to visit her, and when he enters, he sees a crowd of rude people, and Rachel is struggling to take all their orders on time. Rachel starts telling one of her child's stories to a customer, and he rudely interrupts her, demanding his order. Ethan steps in and asks her to continue, and Rachel is surprised to see him there. After noticing she can't handle all the orders on her own, Ethan offers to help, and although she initially refuses, she allows him to work with her. After selling various pastries and coffee, Ethan and Rachel sit in the quiet shop to rest. He asks if there are any updates about Gary, and she tells him he will undergo a scan in an hour. Rachel asks him about Daisy and Vanessa, and he tells her that he's alone that night. The remaining hot chocolate drink is left on the machine, so Rachel asks Ethan if he wants spicy hot chocolate. Not knowing what she means, Ethan laughs and says he'll drink whatever the chef recommends. Rachel pours them a cup of hot chocolate, but adds a little alcohol to spice it up. They toast, and Ethan says the hot chocolate is very good. As a way to thank him for helping with Gary, Rachel gives Ethan fresh bread, but she notices his face darkens. She asks if something is wrong, and he says that he used to bake bread with his late wife and their daughter. He jokes that the bread was awful, but the memories were beautiful. Rachel asks what she was like, and Ethan describes his late wife as a song he wanted to listen to over and over again. "The risk of love is loss," Rachel says, recalling the words of her late mother. A power outage occurs, and they decide to go for a walk. Ethan asks her how she knew what she wanted to do with her life, and she tells him that she fell in love with cooking as a child. She says cooking is chaotic, but something beautiful comes out of it. Interested, Rachel asks him about his first book, and he calls it the Titanic among books because it completely failed. She comforts him, saying that her first restaurant was also a failure, but her restaurant Gilini was a success because it's always been her true passion. She takes out a croissant-like pastry, and Ethan thinks it's a croissant. Rachel looks at him offended and says that it's a cornetto. It's delicious because it's made with love, not strategy. She advises him to start doing things with his heart, not his mind, and those words stick with Ethan. He smiles at her and admits that he has an idea, but he needs to show it, not just talk about it. She agrees, and they head to his secret place. He's more than excited to show her the place and can't believe no one has been there. Rachel awkwardly laughs, and he asks if she's been there. She tries to lie, but admits that she loves going to that place. Ethan confesses that the place inspired his novel, a story about light and darkness, set in New York. The girl finds her imaginary friends in the shadows of the city buildings. It's about how she finds beauty in the shadows. Rachel looks at him in awe and says that this is his cornetto. The ringing of the phone interrupts their moment, and it's Gary. Rachel leaves for the hospital, and Ethan goes to pick up Vanessa at the airport. The next morning, Gary wakes up while Rachel is preparing pies in the kitchen. He greets her and wishes her good morning. He takes a bite of eggs and says they're excellent, but asks her to take a break from cooking so they can open their presents. Rachel frantically tries to come up with weak excuses to avoid opening the presents, but Gary insists. While Gary and Rachel are opening their presents, Daisy, Ethan, and Vanessa are doing the same. Gary and Ethan's gifts are the last ones, and both are surprised when they see that the gifts aren't what they bought. Rachel opens the blue box and doesn't know what to say. Gary comes closer and is just as surprised as she is. He takes the ring out of the box and Rachel asks him if he's sure. Gary answers, admitting that he doesn't remember when he bought the ring, but he is sure he wants to propose. He says that the 3 years they've spent together are more than enough for him to be sure that he wants to marry her. He proposes to her, and she says yes. As the couple celebrates their engagement, Ethan becomes quiet when he sees Vanessa open the box with earrings, shocked because he didn't see the ring there. Not knowing the whole plan, Vanessa thanks him for the gift and goes to order food. Daisy asks Ethan where the ring is, and he remembers that he put the Tiffany bag down when he went to help Gary and realizes he must have taken his bag by mistake. After the engagement celebration, Rachel can be seen cleaning the apartment. She takes her coat and feels something in it, a small bottle of alcohol that she put in Ethan's hot chocolate. It brings a smile to her face, and she decides to keep it in her drawer. Terry stares at the ring in disbelief as Rachel tells everyone that she's engaged. She can't believe Gary could afford such an expensive ring and asks if he did something illegal to get it. Everyone congratulates Rachel on her engagement, and Terry's girlfriend asks if she will have a party, but Rachel says she doesn't like big parties. They get back to work, and Terry asks Rachel about the message she sent the previous night. Rachel tells her about the secret place and the word she visited with Ethan. Terry is surprised to hear about Ethan, and Rachel tells her that she was just killing time with Ethan while waiting for Gary. Terry questions if they had a romantic walk, but Rachel explains that there was nothing to it. Ethan returns to the bakery to inform Rachel about the mix-up, but instead of her, he finds a colleague. She tells him to look for her at the restaurant, so he leaves. He returns home and gives Vanessa and Daisy 2 tickets to the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. He wants them to have a girls' day out so that he can write in peace. Daisy understands what her father is trying to do and agrees to entertain Vanessa until he finds the ring. Terry and Rachel are loading a truck full of pastries in front of the restaurant when Ethan approaches them. He asks Terry for Rachel, and when she asks who he is, Rachel steps out behind him. Ethan tells her he's looking for Gary to check on how he's doing. Rachel will have lunch with Gary and offers to give him Ethan's number, but Ethan suggests joining them. Gary checks his purchases at Tiffany's because he's worried about how the ring ended up with him. The receipt shows that he bought a pair of earrings, but how the ring ended up in the box remains a mystery. As he was leaving, his colleague asked if he could tattoo another client, and although he was supposed to meet Rachel, he agrees. Rachel and Ethan sit in the restaurant, and he notices her ring. He says, "Wow," and she realizes he's referring to the ring. She tells him that she got engaged on Christmas morning with the most beautiful ring in the world. Not understanding the whole situation, she asks him how his engagement went. Ethan looks at her, not knowing what to say, and simply says that he didn't propose yet, but he plans to. Rachel gets a message from Gary saying that he won't be able to come and suggests that she and Ethan stay. Ethan asks her how she met Gary, and she tells him that he did her first tattoo. He asks if she thinks Gary is a good guy and if he would return $5 if he found them. Rachel tries to describe Gary to him and tells him a story about her bracelet. After she got the tattoo, Rachel noticed she didn't have the bracelet on her wrist. It was a bracelet her mother had given her, so it had sentimental value. In a panic, she went to the station and saw Gary there. She was impressed that he had traveled 8 stations to return the bracelet to her. So, she tells Ethan that Gary is the type of person who would return the $5 to the owner. Daisy and Vanessa enjoy a walk when they bump into Brian. Brian is a representative from the company Ethan agreed to work with. Vanessa is surprised when Brian says that Ethan decided to work with them. This means Ethan will have to stay in New York. Gary decides to stop by the restaurant after he finishes his work. He brought flowers for Rachel, but is surprised to find out she isn't there. Terry tells him she hasn't seen her since she went to lunch with him. Ethan and Rachel take a walk after dinner, and she tells him she's been thinking about the book she plans to write. He laughs and hopes she starts writing, as all he does is procrastinate and doubt himself. Rachel tells him he should do it because one day she'd like to go to a bookstore and see his book there. A beautiful melody stops them in their tracks. The band playing soul music catches their attention, and they stop to enjoy it. They both say they love the song at the same time, making them smile. They begin to walk back, and Rachel stops to apologize for Gary not showing up, but she wants to ask Ethan one more question. She feels like he came to her for other reasons, not just to see Gary, and she asks him about it. Ethan doesn't know what to say, so he asks her if she can go home by herself. He wishes her all the best and hopes everything will be fine with her before he leaves, leaving her alone on the sidewalk. Rachel goes home and sees that Gary has called her several times, but she decides not to answer. Ethan does some research on Gary online when Vanessa enters. She asks him why he hasn't answered her calls, and he admits that he lost his phone again. She asks if he has anything to tell her, and he says there's no reason to worry. Vanessa tells him that he's been absent during a trip he planned, and he admits he knows she's there for him, but just says, okay. The next morning, Ethan goes to the tattoo studio where Gary works, and they finally meet. Gary thanks him for his help, and Ethan says it was nothing. Gary asks how he can help him, and Ethan says he wants his ring back. Gary tells him to stay away from his fiancée and says that if he lost something, it's not his problem. He leaves, and Ethan is left without his ring. Rachel walks around the city, thinking about everything that's going on, her engagement, her connection to Ethan, and the strange feelings she has for him. After walking for a while, she finds herself in front of Tiffany's store and decides to go in. As Rachel is at the counter, she asks the saleswoman to teach her how to care for her ring. The saleswoman tells her they have a cleaning kit, and Rachel says she'll take one. The saleswoman comments on Rachel's ring, saying she knew Rachel would say yes. She remembers every ring she sells, and she mentions that Rachel's was a difficult choice. She congratulates them all, and Rachel asks what she means by all three. The saleswoman remembers the name of the fiancé's daughter, and when she says it's Daisy, Rachel's heart breaks. Shocked, she says nothing and immediately leaves the store. Baking is a form of meditation for Rachel, so she goes to the bakery to calm down. She ends up making more than enough bread, and Terry can tell something must be wrong. Gary arrives at the bakery, and Terry asks him what he did to Rachel. He admits he didn't do anything that day, but that the previous night had been tough for him. Gary goes to the back and sees Rachel baking. He begins to apologize for not showing up that night, but says it's because of the clients he's been receiving due to her article in New York Magazine. He starts praising her for how kind she is to him and how much he appreciates it. Rachel stops kneading the dough and asks Gary how he got the ring. She wonders how he was able to afford such an expensive ring. Gary admits he made a mistake, but was certain he wanted to marry her after seeing her with the ring in her hand. He asks her about his plan, and he says he didn't have a plan, but seeing her with the ring showed him that being with her is the one thing he wants most in life. Rachel says she'll return the ring, but asks Gary if he wants to marry her without the ring or without the mental stress. He says he'd love to, and asks if she could give him another chance. He suggests they have an engagement celebration at the New Year's party, and Rachel agrees. Daisy and Ethan arrive at the restaurant, and Terry greets them. Daisy goes to see Rachel in the back, while Ethan stays with Terry. She asks him if he has something to tell her, and he decides to be open about everything. Daisy is excited when she sees Rachel making bread and offers to help. Rachel tells her to put on an apron, and she goes to talk to Gary alone. She tells him that she'll deal with the situation with Ethan, and he quietly slips out through the back door. Terry is shocked when she finds out what Gary has done, and Ethan tells her he tried, but didn't want to break Rachel's heart. Rachel and Daisy have fun while preparing rolls for baking. Daisy asks how long it takes Rachel to make bread, and Rachel says it takes some time. While waiting for the bread to bake, Rachel spends time reflecting, something Daisy also loves doing. Rachel tells Daisy that she was the same age as her when she lost her mother. She asks Daisy if she likes talking about her mother, or if it makes her sad. Daisy says it makes her both happy and sad, and Rachel shares with her a trick. Daisy has to find one special thing she did with her mother, and do it every year. The little girl laughs and mentions the Christmas tradition of choosing ugly sweaters for each other. They stopped doing it when her mother passed away, but Rachel tells her she must continue that tradition in her mother's name. Ethan arrives and asks Daisy if he can talk to Rachel alone, and the little girl leaves. Rachel tells Ethan that she knows everything and that it's crazy. She apologizes for it, and Ethan apologizes for not being able to tell her the truth. However, Rachel thanks him for being a good man. She says Gary will contact him and hands him a bag of Cornettos. Ethan thanks her for everything and wishes her a good life before he leaves. Rachel watches him go, tears welling up in her eyes, and a sad smile appears on her face. Terry tries to tell Rachel about what Gary did, unaware that Rachel already knows. Rachel stops her, saying she already knows everything. Terry asks what's going on with their relationship, and Rachel responds that they're still together. She acknowledges that there is something between her and Ethan, but reassures Terry that Ethan only wanted his ring back. Rachel says that Gary is not perfect, but she doesn't feel that she should turn her back on him, and she believes he will get better. At dinner, Daisy, Ethan, and Vanessa are sitting at the table, with bread from Rachel's bakery on the table. Vanessa asks Daisy where they were earlier, and Ethan answers that they went to the bakery. Daisy says they got the bread that's on the table, and Ethan and Vanessa begin to break off pieces. They pull on the bread from both sides, and soon it breaks in half, revealing the ring inside. Vanessa is in shock, waiting for Ethan to ask her the marriage question. He asks if she will marry him, and she says yes. Excited, Vanessa goes to call people and make arrangements for when they return to Los Angeles. Daisy asks Ethan why he didn't tell Vanessa about New York, and he responds that they should focus on the happy moments. Time passes, and both Ethan and Rachel enjoy their relationships. Although they are happy, they can't stop thinking about each other and the time they spent together. Just before the New Year's Eve countdown, Vanessa calls Rachel's bakery to ask if they have reservations for New Year's Eve. Terry tells her they have a private event, but when she finds out that Vanessa and Ethan are engaged, her opinion changes. She makes a reservation and expects them at 8 o'clock. On New Year's Eve, the preparations for the party at Rachel's restaurant are in full swing. Gary arrives before 8 o'clock, and everyone is surprised that he's on time. He introduces his cousin, Finn, who immediately gives off a creepy vibe. He calls Rachel hot and stares at her from head to toe. Finn starts talking about how strange it is that they never met because he was with Gary when Gary and Rachel first met. Rachel smiles, and Finn mentions a girl named Amber. When Gary arrives, Finn turns to him and says life is crazy because Gary had planned to be with Amber in Queens, but instead, he met his future wife. Rachel shoots him a deadly look, and they go into the kitchen for a private conversation. Rachel can't believe she allowed Gary to think he came because of her. He defends himself, saying it's not fair and that it happened 3 years ago. Rachel disagrees and says he's lied multiple times, and their relationship no longer works. She admits that she can't take it anymore and leaves the kitchen. Ethan is surprised when he sees them coming into the restaurant, but Vanessa tells him she has a surprise for him when they enter. As soon as they walk in, they see Rachel and Gary arguing. Rachel stops, and Vanessa says she made a reservation. Daisy introduces Gary and Rachel to Vanessa, and she introduces herself as Ethan's fiancée. Gary interrupts and tells Rachel that everything turned out as they wanted because Vanessa got her ring back. Rachel tells him to shut up, and Vanessa asks if they're talking about her ring. Little Daisy tries to save the situation by saying that Gary and Rachel are getting married, but they both say they broke up. Ethan is surprised, and Gary asks him why it matters to him whether they're engaged or not. Vanessa asks Ethan what's going on, and he tells her the whole truth. Vanessa realizes that Rachel knew, and that she put the ring in the bread. She asks Ethan if he had planned to propose that day, and he tries to explain that he had planned to, but she leaves. New Year's comes, and Ethan and Vanessa are arguing in the living room. She feels humiliated, and he says he had planned to propose to her at Christmas, but the whole ring situation happened. Vanessa asks him about his job offer with Brian, and he admits that he didn't tell her because he feels she doesn't support him. She asks him to forget everything and be honest with her about what he really wants. He sits down and says he wants to write another book, try again, and move to New York. She sits next to him and admits she hates New York, that it's too much for her, and that, even if she stayed with him, she can't go back there. Rachel is sitting with Terry in a restaurant and asks her why she accepted Vanessa's reservation for the evening of her engagement party. Terry says she doesn't know why she did it, but she's always had a bad feeling about Gary. She apologizes, and Rachel accepts her apology. Some time passes, and Ethan and Daisy are in the living room. Daisy asks him if he had planned to marry Vanessa because she would be a good mother and role model for her. She wants her father to marry someone he loves. She looks at him, and he notices she wants to say something. Eventually, Daisy says that he has to fight for Rachel, so they get up and start brainstorming a plan. While Terry is on a call at the restaurant on a very busy day, she receives flowers and thinks they are from her girlfriend. Daisy and Ethan deliver the flowers to Rachel, but Ethan has lost his phone, so they decide to wait for her on the bridge. During the entire wait, Rachel isn't aware of what's happening. Terry's girlfriend arrives at the restaurant, and Terry thanks her for the flowers. She looks at them and says she didn't send any flowers. After reading the card, they realize that Ethan wrote a message for Rachel to meet him on the bridge. They hand the flowers to Rachel, and she immediately leaves the restaurant. She tries to run there, but ends up taking a taxi. Meanwhile, Daisy and Ethan are losing hope. The little girl begs her father to stay for 5 more minutes, and then they hear Rachel calling them. Ethan admits that they don't know each other, but he decided to think with his heart, and his heart led him to her. He leans in towards her, and they finally give in. We jump forward a year to see a Christmas party at the restaurant. Everyone is happy, and even Ethan and Daisy are part of the team. Ethan raises a glass and gathers everyone's attention. He especially thanks Rachel for preparing the delicious food. He calls her a beautiful and talented woman who has helped him a lot. She is his cornetto, and he doesn't know what he would do without her. A band enters and plays Rachel's favorite song. Ethan knows their story has been confusing, but he doesn't want to focus on that. He only wants to focus on the outcome. He asks Rachel if she will marry him, pulls out the ring that started it all. She says yes, and everyone starts singing and dancing with the joyful news, ringing in the new year.